We're coming into a strange time with regards to COVID vaccines, what happened with the pandemic and mandates. And it's becoming clearer that there is an appetite to acknowledge where mistakes had occurred. For me, this is not about trying to point fingers. For me, the reason why we need to do this acknowledgement is because if you don't understand what went wrong, one, you may do it again, and two, you have little opportunity to mitigate what had happened in the past. This is very important, and that's where I'm coming from a clinical and a research point of view. We've just recently had a discussion, a clip of a discussion from Dr. Martin McCary, and I've got him here. He is the Commissioner for Food and Drugs, the FDA, and he has recently been appointed. And I think it's important to acknowledge that he was one of those people who didn't agree with the approach with the mandates. And that's probably one of the reasons why he was appointed in the position that he was, because there is no point continuing with leadership or expertise that made critical mistakes early on in the pandemic, because one, they'll do it again. And so, as we can see here, he was confirmed on March 25th, 2025. It was a bipartisan vote as the 27th Commissioner of Food and Drugs. So, this is a very senior position. His background is surgical oncology, and he was at Johns Hopkins University of Medicine, and he has done quite a number of important pieces of research and work during that time. So I'm positioning that so that you'll understand why what he said in this recent interview is so important. And this was taken from, again, on X, where I saw this from the chief nerd. I always try and give credit to who shared these things. And he has shared a short 2-minute clip from a discussion that was done on the Epoch Times. I'll come to that in just a moment. And in it, I'm going to try and clarify a few points that I think are relevant with regards to what he said. So let's listen to what he's talking about, and I will try and come in and make some of my own points on top of what he's saying. So let's go forward.
We're committed to that. And I don't want people to think that, we're blowing off the safety signal that many people have described. I personally know of people who have been injured by the vaccine. I personally know of friends who have lost a loved one from the mRNA COVID vaccine. So I think it is reasonable at this time to say we want good, solid, definitive data.
I'll just pause it here for a moment. And there's a reason why he's talking about this. And it was largely because there was a recent approval of from the FDA for the new Moderna COVID vaccine, still for children above 6 months. They have not recommended it for healthy children and pregnant women, but it's still available. Now, a lot of people said they should have pulled it completely at that point. And so this is what he is making an answer to, that he believes that they need to go through due process in order to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And in truth, I agree with that because many people don't understand, one, whether or not vaccines worked in the first place. There are many people who say they absolutely didn't. I say no, they did work. We saw the antibody levels, we saw the reduction in severe disease. What I am not sure about is whether or not all cause mortality, meaning that it may have saved the life early on, but the person may have died later on from other complications. That's one part of it. And the use in low risk populations, cohorts, I thought was definitely a mistake that will still need to be addressed. So let's hear a little bit more about what he had to say.
And the conditional limited approval of the COVID vaccines is in that framework that we want to see a proper data set come to us so we can take a good look at that data.
You mentioned you're aware of some people who have been injured and even lost a loved one
Yes.
through these mRNA products. there's a kind of a whole movement of people. For example, React 19 is, I think, the most prominent nonprofit that is acting to help people who have been injured, or believe they have been injured. And is there any action being taken to try to help them? I know that as we're recording here, there's about to be another hearing related to the experiences of those people, and the prospects of them getting help, because that in many cases they were not given it.
Yeah.
I'll pause here again. This is a very, very important point. And just in case somebody is watching who has a strong belief in what was done during the pandemic and they believe that the right approach was taken, that's all well and good. However, if you have a situation where people were encouraged, especially when they knew that, or they didn't know the long-term benefits, where it was experimental before a lot of the research had come through, or when people had mandates. If you had people who got injured from these jabs and there was no sense of responsibility, that kind of leadership must not be allowed to be in that position again. That's my personal belief, because the critical aspect in a duty of candor is not just that you acknowledge that something went wrong, but you do your utmost to try and understand why and try and reduce the risk of it happening again. That definitely didn't happen in the pandemic. And that's one of the reasons why I hold many people accountable who were in senior positions, because they didn't even try to understand what were the implications for many people who were harmed. Let's listen to some more as to what he had to say.
Well, first of all, vaccine injury is real. I do believe that. I also think there were some cases of long COVID ascribed to long COVID when it may have been simply vaccine injury.
Pausing there again, that's a very, very important point. Now, you have two sides of the puzzle here. On one side, you have some people who say long COVID is because of the vaccine. I can guarantee you, from a scientific point of view, that's not accurate. Many people had long COVID before vaccines came out. So infection can definitely cause long COVID on its own. What the problem is what happens to the people who get long COVID-like symptoms just from being vaccinated. Now, very often this is ignored, and some people don't even realize this happens about this, because if they say it too loudly, they will be criticized by the unvaccinated for getting vaccinated, and they'll be criticized by the vaccinated that they're making it up. And so very often you don't hear about these people, but there are a lot of them. So you have two pieces of the puzzle here, and there is an intermediate piece where have people who had long COVID get worse outcomes after being vaccinated, but there is a lot of evidence saying that getting vaccinated improves their outcomes. Now, my view is that if that was as straightforward as the science is suggesting, almost everybody who has long COVID would still be getting vaccinated. That is definitely not the case. So it seems to have an impact in improving symptoms in some people, but if that is about the immune response, it's going to be temporary, and it hasn't yet resolved all of the problems. Let's continue to listen.
Now, I'm not saying that's all of them. I don't want people to read too much into that, but I would like people to be patient with us as we try to approach this methodologically, collecting the proper data. It is easy to react. I was very angry when I learned that a friend's father had died from the COVID vaccine. And look, we're convinced it was causal until proven otherwise. You can always nitpick and say, well, this could have been a random event, but no. There are many reasons why we are confident that it was causal. Now, when I say
And I'll pause you here because, again, this is a very, very important point. Vaccine injury, and especially when it comes to deaths, when you look at the published reports, it is very difficult to say specifically that this intervention caused this particular death to happen at that time. It's easier when there is a tight time frame. If someone had a vaccine and within a day or two, with no comorbidities, they die of something else, it's very difficult for you to point out that it's something else. However, there is some very important research coming through from the Japanese, the Citizen Report that you may have heard very little about because it has been so suppressed, where they looked at 21 million cohort in Japan. And when they compared the vaccinated to unvaccinated, they saw a signal at about 90 to 120 days. Important to know this has not been fully corroborated by detailed analysis of the science. However, it is an important flag that indicates that if people die 90 days or 120 days down the line, it is almost not impossible. The only people who have seen that kind of correlation, again, are the Japanese, but it's very difficult to see the direct correlation with a vaccine injury and a death 3 to 4 months down the line. That's where it becomes very, very problematic. And the people can argue from one side or the other as to what the cause was. And even sometimes autopsies can't necessarily specifically highlight the point. However, it's still real and it still needs to be acknowledged in order for us to move forward.
We, not the FDA, but me and my circle of friends and loved ones who know this individual who lost their father. So people have a right to be angry. They have been deceived on different aspects of the COVID pandemic. They have been ordered to march into a vaccine line, even if they were healthy and low risk and already had circulating antibodies. People have a right to be upset, but I would ask people to be patient with us as we do this the proper scientific way.
Important points. And I think part of the reason he has to do this is that if he acted too impulsively and just decided, as many people wanted, to pull it off the market, there are legal consequences of that, especially in terms of the industry. And so it has to be tread very carefully. And there has to be clear documentation as to why this was considered an issue. So he is wise to be cautious with it. And he is wise to ask for restraint and patience because there is no easy way to undo this. And remember something I always highlight, especially in the context of abnormal IgG4 tolerant antibodies in the boosted. When it comes to exposure of the spike protein, it's immune hyperactivity that does the damage. If you have a cohort who have their immune systems modulated by the IgG4 from the boosting, when you then remove that, you can have a situation where you have worse outcomes. And so, one of the realities that has to be faced that may need to be acknowledged by public health is that once some people are on this IgG4 treadmill, it is not easy to come off. You could almost put it akin, and it's not the same thing, but I'll give you an example. Somebody who is drinking alcohol very heavily, their body has become dependent on it. We oftentimes have to tell the person to still continue drinking, even though you know alcohol is bad for them in that context. You want them to wean down slowly so their body has time to adjust. Now, it's not quite the same thing in terms of an analogy, but I'm highlighting the point that when the body gets into a pattern, it is important that you don't suddenly withdraw or change it. And so, in that context, there are likely to be a cohort of individuals who need to continue to have IgG4 boosting. We need to understand who they are. We need to understand why we're doing it. We need to understand the longer term implications. That's the kind of study that needs to be done. There's still a long way to go, but I do believe that there are enough people shifting into positions of power that should be able to guide us through that step and lead us into a clearer, more scientific, more honest future where we can acknowledge and hopefully mitigate some of the damage that has been done to science and public health and bring us back to a better future for everyone. Thank you.